Hello, and welcome to the Geopolitics Explained podcast. Throughout the entire month of March, all of the podcast episodes that were released were pre-recorded. This is my first episode back that I am recording in real time. Because every episode was pre-recorded in March, there were a lot of things that happened during the month that I will attempt to catch up on in the next few episodes. The main story being the war in Iran. But for today, we're going to conclude the series that we were undertaking in March, which was on the intersection between game theory and geopolitics. Last week, I wrote about using geopolitics, game theory, mathematics, and psychology in an attempt to form predictions. While scenario trees can often simplify events that are a lot more complex in reality, they do form a basis from which we can attempt to make some predictions in geopolitics. We can assign potential decisions that geopolitical actors could make, as well as the likelihood that a particular strategy is one that a nation would be incentivized to pursue. Over time, as more information is revealed publicly, we can update the potential scenarios and the associated probabilities that such scenarios will unfold. We hence concluded from this discussion on prediction that the quality of any geopolitical prediction is based on the quality of information that is available. This applies to us as we seek to break down issues that we see emerge in our geopolitical world, but it also applies to nations that are seeking to predict how other nations could act in the future. As a result of these attempts to predict, our world is going to grow into one where nations seek to gain high quality information that pertains to the actions of other nations. At the same time, nations will also be trying to shield their own high quality information that would reveal their potential strategies and payoffs to other nations. As we look to the future of game theory and geopolitics, high quality information will be a vital characteristic. What could this world look like? It's this question that we'll be exploring today. Before exploring the trends that will involve information, we first need to explore why we are living through chaotic times. Conflict is growing more hybrid in nature. Infrastructure warfare can be coupled with trade conflict, technological tussles, and cultural battles. This is one example of our world growing more complex. It's in relation to conflict growing more complex. In such a world, the global system is moving away from one of unipolar dominance to one of a multipolar contest. The rules-based order is no longer accepted as strongly as it was in the past. Institutions are weakening. Globalization is turning into regionalization, and rising powers are testing boundaries. One of the biggest consequences of our geopolitical world growing more complex is that nations have to make more decisions. The complexity of game theory and geopolitics boils down to the fact that geopolitics is a game with 195 nations. We can also refer to these nations as players, and each of these players has a strategy that it will pursue with different payoffs. If we also consider non-state actors and the individual incentives of world leaders, then we have even more than 195 players in the game of geopolitics. As I've discussed during this series on game theory, geopolitics is a sequential game. When one nation makes a decision, this affects the payoffs received by other players. As a result, in a more complex world with more decisions, we see more responses. If these responses are non-cooperative, such as we are seeing in the world today, then we see geopolitical tensions rise. It's this that contributes to geopolitics being a dynamic game which expands into multiple domains, such as military, supply chains, technology, energy, and finance. This expansion of geopolitics into these realms is the reason why geopolitics is so unavoidable today. It's because these realms overlap and they affect our everyday lives. So, geopolitics is growing more prevalent and more complex than in the previous few decades. In this world, those who build options and resiliency are those who have power. This could be hard power through nuclear weapons or a strong military, or it could be soft power through culture and language. This could also be connective power through trade, finance, technology, or market share of key commodities. But another form of power is emerging. In the future, we will see the power of information and the key role that it will play in geopolitics as we move forward. Because geopolitics is a sequential game, we often see repeated interactions between nations. Repeated interactions provide nations with more information. With more information, nations update their beliefs. This can lead to changing strategies and changing payoffs. This contributes to the following geopolitical decision loop. Nations acquire information, they interpret this information, they make a decision based on this information, and then they pursue a response. They will then receive feedback from another geopolitical actor, and from this feedback, they will update their beliefs. This loop then returns to the beginning, when more information is acquired. This loop explores nations receiving general information. However, a vital characteristic of this information is that it is of high quality. This is information that is accurate, timely, as complete as possible, and is interpretable. In a world of elevated geopolitical tension, some nations will build capabilities to pursue higher quality information. In such a world, because nations don't want to risk falling behind their geopolitical adversaries, they will also be incentivized to pursue higher quality information. This will contribute to an information arms race. And in such an arms race, a feedback loop of escalation is the risk. However, there is also the flip side of this information arms race to consider, and that is a race to the bottom. Not all information is of high quality. Nations will acquire information and attempt to interpret it, but what if this information was flawed before they received it? Nations can purposefully publish information that is incorrect, or information that is incomplete, so that any actor observing the information doesn't receive the full picture. A geopolitical actor could also delay information or create noise with a flood of information so that the true useful facts are buried in irrelevant clutter. Nations will push low-quality information because this weakens the strength of other nations' strategies and payoffs. It can lead to miscalculation, but in relation to the potential to escalate, pushing low-quality information can also lead to overreaction or failed deterrence. As a result, in the pursuit of high-quality and low-quality information to mislead others, geopolitical nations are risking further escalation. It's both of these pursuits that contribute to the information arms race. And this information arms race is already underway. But the methods that nations will undertake in the pursuit of high quality and low quality information are the most worrying aspects of this pursuit. For example, in an aim to reduce human error in geopolitical decisions, could we export decision-making to machines? In many ways, we already are. If you need a recipe, do you search the internet or do you ask artificial intelligence to find it for you? If you have a word that you don't know the meaning of, do you grab a dictionary or do you ask artificial intelligence? If you need a summary of a piece of text, do you write out notes and condense the key points yourself, or does artificial intelligence do it quicker than you ever could? These are but a few examples of how in our personal lives we could turn to artificial intelligence. But in the battle for information of high quality, will nations do the same? The worrying aspect is that some leaders already are. In August 2025, Sweden's Prime Minister stated that he had used ChatGPT for second opinions, and Albania also appointed an AI bot to monitor public contracts for signs of corruption. This is already a trend that is emerging in our world, and it will grow more prevalent because the alternative is to decline relative to other geopolitical actors in the information arms race. We as humans possess knowledge gaps and biases. Artificial intelligence could improve the assessment of quality information. It could issue earlier warning signals. And artificial intelligence has more knowledge to inform decisions than individual humans ever could. In such a world, controlling these systems that interpret our world will lead to a nation possessing greater information power. Now, of course, this isn't without risk. Flawed AI models can lead to outputs that are pursued in false confidence. Also, low-quality information can still make its way through artificial intelligence systems to manipulate them. And of course, the biggest risks are those of artificial general intelligence and a runaway train that we cannot stop. This pursuit also risks seeing our already complex geopolitical world growing even more complicated due to faster feedback loops. There is also the question of what role artificial intelligence systems will play. Will they be tools for decision support, or will they be an individual geopolitical actor making autonomous decisions? Despite these heavy risks, the alternative for nations is to decline relative to its adversaries. As a result, in the world today, nations are incentivized to pursue greater implementation of artificial intelligence in geopolitics to aid decision-making and to boost the power of information. Outside of artificial intelligence, there are other ways that nations can seek high-quality information. Rather than relying on a single source of information, states can build layered intelligence systems that possess speed and accuracy. These methods include OSINT, HUMINT, SIGINT, IMINT, GEOINT, and MASINT, as well as economic and financial signals such as capital flows, sanctions, trade anomalies, and shipping insurance data, and allied intelligence sharing, which is typically seen in groups such as NATO and Five Eyes. So, now that we've established this framework for how artificial intelligence could be used in the future of game theory and geopolitics, what could this future look like? Back in 2023, I wrote a post called The Game Theory of Now. The key conclusion that I made from that post was that we were living through a period of increased geopolitical tension. Today, our world is even more chaotic and even more tense than it was back in 2023. And so I'd say that nations will be increasingly incentivized to utilize AI to model decision making and to gauge the quality of information. Especially because in this world of greater chaos and tension, outcomes, strategies, and payoffs are more difficult to gauge. Nations will then make decisions based on this information. The nation that can best cut through low quality information and that can acquire high quality information will be best positioned to take advantage of this chaotic geopolitical world. Now, if we zoom out and look on a more long-term view, cycles between periods of chaos and periods of peace do come and go, and this period of geopolitical tension that we're living through will pass. But for now, the future of geopolitics won't only be a game of hard power, or soft power, or connective power. It will also be a game of information. This concludes my series on game theory. I hope that the last month was useful in painting a picture of our geopolitical world, especially as global tensions are rising. We remain embroiled in the middle of these tensions, and as I discussed today, I believe we will remain in this period for some time. As I alluded to in the introduction, a huge part of this instability is being seen in the Middle East. On Friday, I'll continue to discuss the second-order effects that will emerge due to this conflict in Iran, as I've been discussing over on Substack. The second-order effects include the emergence of regionalisation, which I discussed last Thursday on Substack. If you head over there, you can find that post. The link to Substack is in the description. But other second-order effects that I will discuss on Friday include the emergence of a new nuclear world, where states are seeking access to nuclear weapons to protect themselves. We've already seen a development here with the Saudi Arabia-Pakistan Defence Pact, where Pakistan has stated that their nuclear arsenal will be made available to the Saudis if required. It's the second order effects we'll discuss in more detail on Friday. That's all for today. If you enjoyed this episode, or if you enjoyed the series on game theory in the last month, please consider leaving a review on the podcast platform of your choice. It really helps out the podcast. I've been Dylan, and I'll talk to you next time.